Thank you, guys. Good morning again, everyone, and welcome. As we've mentioned a couple times, both in the welcome and then also just in the prayer there, today is the first Sunday of Advent. And for those who maybe are unfamiliar with that type of language, maybe that doesn't mean very much to you. Maybe that's just simply something you've heard associated with Christmas, and you're kind of like, I don't know, it has something to do with it. But as Phil prayed, it really is about entering into a season of anticipation. It's a season of waiting, a season of preparation. The idea is that we are awaiting the birth of the Savior. And just like the people of God for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years are waiting upon this promise of a Messiah, of a King that would come, we as Christians today enter into this season trying to emulate that in some sense. Trying to not get caught up in the hurriedness of what's become a Christmas sort of season and really trying to look at it from a biblical perspective. Practically speaking, Advent means there's only 24 more sleeps, as we call them in our house, until Christmas Day, all right? So that's really where the excitement starts to kick in. And, you know, when we talk about preparation, I think for a lot of people, there's probably maybe a mixed bag in this room when we think about that. Some of you are the planners, all right? Some of you have started your Christmas shopping in August, and you've got lists where you are keeping track of everything. Maybe some of you actually hit the sales last January or earlier in January in preparation for Christmas already. And then there's the rest of you, and the rest of you are just trying to survive right now. And you really would be quite happy if those people who were organized would just shut up about how organized they are, right? But regardless of whether your tree is up, whether your shopping is done, today for us as a church is a moment of spiritual preparation. It's where we begin to orient our hearts towards the things of the Lord. And so that's why we're starting this series called Down to Earth. And this title is chosen for a couple reasons. One, is because just quite literally, the God that we worship, the God that we just sang about, literally came down to earth. Theologically, it's called the incarnation. The idea that God, who is the creator of all, the sustainer of the universe, stepped into humanity, as Philippians chapter 2 talks about, and took on the form of a servant. That's called the incarnation. And so he literally, from heaven, came down to earth. And that reminds us that God is not some sort of distant, faraway type of God who just hides behind the clouds. He's involved in the everyday life. He's involved in the everyday mess and the dust and even the beauty of daily life. But the second reason why we named it Down to Earth is because God has given us a mission that is very down to earth. In other words, it's practical. It's a mission that though heavenly minded, it is profoundly practical in regards to how we are to love our neighbors. It's one of the reasons why we've got the stage the way we have it this morning. Is because we just wanted to simply kind of say, listen, for a lot of us, when we think about Christmas, it happens in a living room. It happens around a fireplace. It happens on a settee or a couch where kids are around you and they're opening up presents and you're hanging out with family and you're at a dinner table where you're having, your Christmas meal. It's down to earth. We are to love people as we love ourselves. It's practical. It's simple in so many ways. And when we look at something like this, for many of you, you probably think so much about just your own kind of traditions that happen throughout Christmas. Those things that make it unique and personal to your family. And it's interesting, like all around the world, everybody has these sort of traditions. Your family has them, my family has them, and some of them are quite unique. Some of them are quite different. For example, did you know that in Japan, All right? This is true, that in Japan it is tradition to eat Kentucky Fried Chicken on Christmas Day. In fact, some people put in their orders for buckets of chicken weeks ahead of time. Right? Amazing. In Romania, it is a tradition, I'd like to see if the men would like to carry this here. It is a tradition for men to dress up as goats and dance through the streets. Any takers on that sort of tradition? Right? And a tradition that was new to me when we moved over here about 6 years ago that I'd never heard of before in my life is the Christmas cracker. This is unique, really, I think to Britain. It's definitely not in America because we didn't have these sort of things. And I got to tell you, I think it's absolutely fascinating because everyone knows what's in a cracker, right? Everyone knows what to expect in these crackers if they don't fall apart, right? You have the paper crown, all right? There's a small, often just useless gift that's included in there, right? And there's a message, usually an incredibly bad dad joke that's included as well. But here's the thing that I love. Here's the thing that I think is absolutely brilliant, that the humble Christmas cracker actually contains the heart of the Christmas story. Think about it for a second. There's a king's crown. There's a gift. And there's a message. Christmas is about a king who comes to bring gifts of hope and joy and peace and love and a message that the angel says is good news for everyone. But what happens is that once you begin getting into the story that's at the heart of the Christmas message, you begin to understand this king who wears a crown, who comes bearing gifts, who comes giving good news, the message of the gospel, is not a normal king. He's an unusual king. And so that's what I want to talk about this morning. If you have your Bibles, and I hope that you do, I want you to look at John chapter 1. Andy has already read the passage for us, but I want us to kind of go, and if this is something that you like to take notes or you like to underline, it's great to have a physical Bible. If you've got your phones or your tablets, that's fine as well. We'll also have verses up here on the screen as we refer to them. And what's great about the Gospel of John is that in John chapter 1, John doesn't start the Christmas story with a manger. John doesn't start the Christmas story focusing on Mary or on Joseph. There are no shepherds, there are no donkeys in the opening of the Gospel of John. What John does, instead of zooming in at all the details, he actually pulls out. He pulls out and he starts with the cosmos. He starts with the blueprint for the entire universe just to set the stage. When he says, in the beginning, at the very beginning, in the beginning was the Word. Now I want you to focus on that. We're going to come back to that in just a second. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. So right away, here's what we see when we look at John. John is establishing for us that at the very beginning, not before the beginning, not after the beginning, but as it began, there was the Word. And apparently, this Word was with God. And not only was this Word with God, but this Word was God. Now we're beginning to see the picture come into more clarity. Whoever this Word was at the beginning. Whoever this Word was with God, but was also God. And not only that, we get further proof that this is a person because it says he, referring to the Word, was in the beginning again with God. And all things were made through this person. And then we come to really the anchor for our morning. In verse 14, this in some sense is the hinge of all creation, the hinge of history. Verse 14 says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father. Now we figure out who the Word is. He was full of grace and truth. So today I want us to look at three things that I think show us why this king that really all of us celebrate every single Christmas, why this king is so unusual, why this king is so different for us, and more importantly, what does it mean for us today? How might it apply to our lives? How might it impact who we are? And so the first thing that we want to talk about is just simply the reality of the incarnation. This unusual king becomes one of us. Now, I want to camp here just for a second, because when John writes in John chapter 1 that the Word became flesh, oftentimes we hear that, and you might hear that read during this time of the year, every single year. It's one of those Christmas verses. And we read that, and we think right away, okay, cool, yep, I know. Jesus was born. I get it. It's about the incarnation. It's about the Christmas story. But I think sometimes what we do is we miss the shock value of the statement. The term for word is actually this original Greek word called logos. And logos, in the Jewish mindset, was the agent of creation. The logos is where the beginning began. The logos is the one who initiated creation. The logos is the one who spoke and things come into being. By speech, God himself creates and relates to people. And then John says, not only is it the logos, but he says that the logos became flesh. Now that's a great word too, because it's not the word for body, it's not the word for man. He uses this word flesh, which actually implies something for us that is we absolutely desperately have to grasp. The idea of flesh implies that this logos, this creator, this agent of creation is frail. That in flesh there's a certain sense of weakness, a certain sense of transience, a certain sense of dust being given life. Now, if you're a Greek philosopher at this time and not Jewish, and you hear the word logos, and you hear that the logos is flesh, you find that offensive. Because you believe that logos is impersonal. You believe that it's just some sort of force that maybe created the world or didn't create the world and is definitely not interested in us. It's interesting how even in the first century, the competing philosophies of the day are still present with us some 2,000 years later. Is he personal or is he not? Is he all-powerful or is he not? Is he real or is he not? But John says, no. The Word is not some impersonal force. The high and the lofty logic, the logos of the universe, put on a diaper. The infinite becomes an infant. That's unusual for a king. Because kings have everything taken care of for them. Kings normally live in palaces. They're insulated from frailty, from the common people. They wear crowns, but they are crowns of gold. In fact, I just recently read that at the coronation for King Charles III, that the crown that he wore, was coronated in, was estimated somewhere up to and around 400 million pounds. Imagine 400 million pounds on your head, right? But this king that John is referring to and introducing us to, this king would not wear a crown of gold, but a crown of thorns. A crown of thorns that wouldn't be worth a penny. And yet it cost him everything. In fact, as I referenced before, Paul says in Philippians chapter 2 that this king emptied himself, taking on the form of a servant. He emptied himself of his divinity. He emptied himself of his kingship in a way, of all that was rightfully his, of all that belonged to him as the one who was in the beginning, who was with God and who was God, who spoke and created everything, is the one who stepped out of that and took on the form of humanity, but specifically the form of a servant. I mean, think about that. Think about the humility it would take for a king, regardless of the country that we're in, a monarch, to actually set aside everything that was due him or her. Everything that they had known for the entirety of their life, every privilege, every sort of blessing, every sort of right that they had, titles they willingly set aside. And not just to become something or someone that disappeared, but specifically became a servant. You see, we sang about it, we value humility today because of Jesus. Jesus is the one whose life actually shook up the world in regards to humility being something that people tried to emulate. In the Roman world, humility was not a virtue. In the Roman world, humility was considered a weakness. The goal of a Roman life was honor. In other words, to have your name praised, to boast of your achievements. To be humble was considered to be low class. And yet, the creator of the cosmos voluntarily submitted himself to the humiliation of human limitations. The king got hungry. The king got tired. The king bled. And eventually, the king submitted to the most shameful of deaths, the cross. So, taking that into consideration, what does that mean for us? What does it mean for the Word to become flesh, to take on that humility, to take on that weakness, for us as everyday people, as, if I could say this, as down-to-earth disciples? Well, for one, it means we don't have to pretend that we've got it all together. It means we don't have to pretend as if all is right in our world. God knows what flesh is. He knows weakness. He knows temptation. He knows frustration. He knows pride. He knows anger, bitterness. He knows what grief feels like. But it also calls us to have a revolution of character as well. Our culture is obsessed with this Roman idea of honor. We call it something else. It's self-promotion. It's advancing your brand. It's making sure everyone knows what you have and how you got it. The way of the kingdom, though, is the opposite of that. And so for us, maybe part of trying to understand what it means that God came in the flesh and thereby showed us what humility really is, maybe for us, maybe this week and in the weeks to come, maybe it looks like celebrating the accomplishment of someone else. Maybe it looks like giving honor and glory to someone else rather than shining the spotlight on you. Celebrating that friend who got a job. Celebrating that coworker who is now pregnant. Maybe it looks like withholding judgment on someone. A judgmental comment on social media. Or maybe it looks like refraining from doom scrolling late at night to focus on the people who are actually right physically present in front of you. Maybe it looks like serving in a role that nobody sees and nobody claps for. The Word became flesh. He identified with the lowly, with the humble, with the weak and the frail. My prayer is that if we want to find Jesus this Advent season, we need to remember that we usually find Jesus among the humble and the low. And that is the reality of the incarnation. The second reason I think this king is so unusual is because of what I'll say is the proximity of the incarnation. The second part of verse 14, after it says that the Word became flesh, also then says, and dwelt among us. He dwelt among us. Eugene Peterson, who was the pastor who did the Message paraphrase of the Bible, I think in one of his best sort of contributions to it, says verse 14 in this way: the Word became flesh and blood and moved into our neighborhood. That's what John's talking about. The word that John uses here when he says he dwelt among us is literally the word to pitch tent. And for those who were listening to him or reading John at that time, they would have instantly thought of, in regards to a tent, as a tabernacle. Their minds would have been racing back to the Old Testament, particularly the Exodus, when God was leading Israel through the wilderness, and there was a tabernacle that they would construct, and God's presence would fall upon there. And that tent, that tabernacle that dwelt among them, was right in the center of camp. Their entire life revolved around that. God didn't just talk to them from a distant mountain, but he lived right in the midst of their grumbling and complaining, right in the midst of their wandering, right in the midst of their mess. I was thinking about this earlier. Some of you may have caught it, some of you may not. But when we had the little miscommunication there about when the scripture reading was supposed to happen there, the pastor forgot to tell the family ministry leader when that was going to happen. And yet, even in the midst of that, God is still present. God works through us and for us. God works for his glory and sees fit to include us in the midst of that. John is saying that Jesus is the new tabernacle. Jesus now is the one who will dwell amongst you. Jesus is the one who, in the vernacular, has pitched his tent next to yours. And this is wildly unusual for a king, right? Did you know that when royalty visits a certain area of the country, do you know what happens to that area of the country? What traditionally happens when royalty says, hey, we're coming for a visit, maybe it's some sort of ribbon cutting, some sort of opening, some sort of visiting of a charity, the city council spends weeks fixing potholes. They do. They landscape the parks. They paint over graffiti. It's been said that wherever royalty goes, the world smells like fresh paint. Think about that. But Jesus is that unusual king. He doesn't wait for us to clean up the neighborhood. He doesn't expect us to have everything in order. He doesn't say everything has to be put right before I step foot into your life. He moved in while the graffiti was still on the walls of our life. He was born literally into a town called Bethlehem that was so small it had to be defined as Bethlehem, the city of David, to avoid confusion with other towns of the same name. He lived in Lazarus most of his life, a place where people said, can anything good come from there? He didn't wait for the temple to be perfect. He didn't wait for the nation of Israel to be 100% faithfully righteous and obedient. He came and inhabited a human form, worked in a builder's shop with calloused hands, subjected himself to the distresses and the disasters of our everyday lives. Jesus knows what it's like to live in the neighborhood. He knows about the pressure of a deadline. He knows about the grief of a loved one. He knows the sting of betrayal. And I think this sometimes challenges our version of Christianity. Whether we admit it or not, or say it up front or not, whether it's conscious or subconscious, oftentimes we treat the church, the people of God, but oftentimes the building of God, as some sort of fortress in order to escape the world. We walk into a building like this, close the door, and we isolate ourselves from what is on the outside. But if we're following this down-to-earth, unusual king, he models for us what we should do. That we move into the neighborhood of people's lives, not forcing ourselves upon them, not being jerks in the process, but it means knowing those who are around us, taking an interest in knowing the literal names of our neighbors. It means being the person who is safe to talk to when a marriage is falling apart. It means we don't just send money to problems, but we send ourselves. You see, the Jews wanted a king in a fortress, and from that fortress would exert power to kick them out, to kick the Romans out. Instead, they get a king in a tent who invited Romans to dinner. That's the proximity of the incarnation. Not only is it the realness of taking on frailty and flesh, but it's the realness of drawing near to other people. In our Advent season, if we want to experience Christ in the midst of this season, maybe we should be asking ourselves the question, who are we tabernacling with? Whose life are we moving into in order to love and to serve and to care for them? The last thing I think we see in John 1:14 is this, is the balance of the incarnation. John is saying, look, there's a reality in that he's flesh, and there's a very near proximity in that he has dwelt among us. Now, look at the description of the king's nature, when at the end of verse 14 it says, and we have seen his glory full of grace and truth. Full of grace and truth. Think again about how unusual that is to hold those two things in balance. A normal king rules by law. He issues edicts. She demands compliance. And those are the strong ones. Potentially a weak monarch might try to be a people pleaser, ignoring all of the laws just to make sure everyone is okay and that they are liked. But Jesus, as this unusual king, holds two things together that we often tear apart: grace and truth. Grace and truth together. Now, I want to be really clear here. I'm not saying that Jesus is 50% grace and 50% truth. He is 100% of both. 100% truth, full of grace and full of truth. Listen, for centuries and centuries and centuries, the people of God, as they're coming into this new era of Jesus, the Messiah being present among them, were looking to God's law as the truth. It was the standard. It showed you what you did wrong. Sometimes we use the Bible in the exact same way. We use this to beat people over the head, right? And we say, this is what it says. It's in black and white. Do or don't do. Obey or disobey. And what we forget is that while it might be like an X-ray, okay? It's a diagnostic tool. It does show you what's wrong. It does show you where you've gone astray. It does give us a standard. That's where the word Bible comes from. It's a standard, a measuring stick. It shows us and diagnoses for us where we are different from the God who is the central character in this story. God's nature, God's character, what he expects of his creation is all found here. And we use this to go, am I that or am I not? Because if I'm not, I need to get there. That's the truth part. And that's great. And we need to make sure we understand that. And we need to make sure that we take that seriously. But an X-ray might tell you that your arm is broken, but it doesn't fix your arm. Jesus brings the truth, but he wraps it in grace. He exposes our sin, but he provides the cure as well. For example, when he encountered the woman at the well, or the woman caught in adultery, or the money-grabbing tax collector, or the follower who betrayed him in his moment of need, the king told the truth to each and every one of them. But it was his grace that set them free. We know what that feels like. At least we understand the tension. We may not always be able to name it, but we live at a time that's constantly trying to divorce grace from truth. Constantly trying to divorce truth from grace. Some people are the truth people, and you know who they are. You might be married to one of them, right? The truth people are the ones who want to make sure you know exactly where they stand. They're the ones who will tell you what is right and wrong. They're the ones who blast their opinions on social media because they are right, but oftentimes because they lack grace, they're mean. Oftentimes they're harsh. That's not who Jesus is. Jesus is 100% grace and 100% truth. But on the other side, you have people who are all grace. They're nice, they're caring, they affirm everything, but they never stand for anything. And they leave people in their sin because they are afraid to offend or to speak up. That's not Jesus either. If John is describing the Word who is flesh that is dwelling amongst us, who is full of grace and full of truth, we have to understand that the unusual King calls us, his people, to be people of grace and people of truth. Truth means we hold on to the biblical standard. We call sin what it is. We acknowledge that the world is broken and in desperate need of a Savior. Grace means that we love the person who lives differently than we are. We forgive the person who gossips and betrays us. We serve the neighbor who doesn't ever put out their bins or cut their grass. We love them. And this Advent, I think it's a reminder for us that the world is in desperate need of that combination. To be full of grace and to be full of truth. That we are to be as Christ in flesh, understanding our weakness, understanding our frailty, and in humility approaching others. That we are to, like Christ, dwell amongst people, moving into their lives, getting up close and personal, not being distracted or in some way offended by the mess of their life, but full of grace and truth, calling out what needs to be called out and doing it in a way that points them to Christ in love. I think people are tired of one or the other. I think most people are tired of angry truth, and I think they are bored with a spineless niceness. I think people are looking for those who are full of grace and full of truth. I think they are ultimately looking for the glory of the only Son. As we close, I just want to come back to this. I want to come back to this Christmas cracker that you're going to see a ton of, right? Every time you go out for a Christmas meal, every time you go into the shops, right? We have them here on the table for a reason, as a reminder that this is a picture that most of us understand, that most of us experience on some level. And I want us to remember that we have a crown. The King who laid aside his glory to wear thorns for your glory. A crown of glory that he has given to us as his sons and as his daughters. We also have a message. We have a message that the Word became flesh, that God is with us. He's in our mess, and he is offered to all. And that is the gift. It is the gift of grace, the gift of truth, offered to everyone freely because Christ has already paid the price on the cross. Maybe you're here today and you weren't quite sure what to expect. You walked in, you saw the big tree. You came in, you sang some great songs, and you weren't quite sure where you are in relation to God. Maybe you're here today and you, if you're honest, and again, God's big enough because he moves into our mess. You feel distant from him. You're not quite sure who he is or how you relate to him. And maybe you feel this overwhelming need that I'm attracted or I'm intrigued, but I need to get things straight. I need to clean up my house, if it were, before I can really, really take him seriously. The message of Advent is he's already moved into your neighborhood. He's come down to earth. He understands the mess. He understands the frustration. He understands the complications. He understands the chaos. He understands the joy, the blessings of life as well. John will go on to say that Christ has come for us to live life and to live life abundantly. He longs for us to experience peace. He longs for us to experience joy. He longs for us to experience love. He longs for us to experience hope. The hope of Advent, the candle lit today, is part of this message that we're all reminded of every time we see a cracker. It's a message of hope that each of us can live, each of us can emulate, each of us can incarnate into our own lives. Jesus is knocking on the door with grace in one hand and with truth in the other. So for each of us, as we prepare for Christmas, let's accept that challenge. Let's accept the challenge that a down-to-earth God has come to us, and as down-to-earth disciples, as down-to-earth people, if it were, we have the opportunity to show people who God is, to make the incarnation practical this week and in this season. Let our own words of encouragement become actions of encouragement. Let's turn our theology into biography, where we are actually living life with people and writing stories with them. Let's show the world who this unusual King is. And let's not forget, the message of Christmas is in our hands. That's one of the reasons